Children's Scrutiny Panel. It's Thursday, 11th of December, 10:30. My name's Ishrat Ali, and I'll be chairing the meeting today. So welcome everybody to the meeting. If we can do a round of introductions, starting with Councillor Bramwell.
Hi everybody, I'm Councillor Bramwell. I'm representing Dewsbury West.
Good morning everybody, I'm Councillor Afat Butt and I represent Hemmond-Wyke.
Morning, I'm Hannah McKirker, representing Denby Dale Ward.
Good morning, my name is Joanne Sanders. I'm Service Director for Learning and Early Support.
Morning, I'm Vicky Metheringham, Service Director, Family Support and Child Protection at Kirklees Council.
Morning, I'm Teresa Rax, Head of Service for Youth Justice and Contextual Safeguarding Kirklees.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Jane Ryler for Home Valley South and Cabinet Member for Education.
Good morning, Claire Gardiner, Democracy Officer.
Good morning, Helen Kilroy, Assistant Democracy Manager in the Governance team. Thank you.
Thank you. So on Teams, we've got Councillor Kendrick.
Good morning, I'm Viv Kendrick. I am Hetman Whitewalk Councillor and the Cabinet Member for Children and Young People's Services.
And we've got Councillor Smith online as well.
Good morning, Richard Smith, Panel Member and Ward, Council for Kirklees Ward.
Thank you and welcome everyone. So agenda item number 2, minutes of the meeting held on 17th of October 2025. I propose that they're correct copy. Do we have a seconder for that?
Yep, seconded.
Thank you, Councillor McKirker. Item number 3, declarations of interest. Have any members got any interest on the agenda that they wish to declare? None received. Thank you. Item number 4, just a reminder that all items will be discussed in public and you need to make a declaration of any interests should you have any. Thank you. Item number 4, deputations and petitions. So no deputations or petitions have been received. Just for a change, we can move on really swiftly to item number 6. Again, public question times. No questions have been received, which takes us on to the first update. So item number 7, which is an update on the anticipated schools white paper in relation to the national reforms to the SEND system. So I'll hand over to Jo Sanderson, Service Director for Early Learning and Support.
Thank you very much, Chair. So on Scrutiny's work programme, we were anticipating to bring you an update following publication of a white paper that was anticipated originally in autumn. Unfortunately, this has been delayed, but we wanted to bring you an update as I think now we can feel fairly secure that the Department for Education will publish what is now being referred to as a schools white paper that will set out some national reforms to the system for inclusion and SEND. So what we wanted to do was make sure that Scrutiny were fully briefed about where things were at. There has been, over the last few months, a select committee that's been looking into all the current system around supporting children and families with SEND. We know that it's an incredibly complex system, and I think, you know, just in terms of there's been an awful lot of reports and research into what is working well and what isn't, and that's for all people in the system, particularly children and families in terms of having their needs met across a partnership. So that's not just about school and education, but it is absolutely about their health needs and care needs as well. What was really interesting in response to a select committee report that was published back in September, the Secretary of State for Education did write to the Select Committee. We've included that letter in the appendix, which sort of makes that commitment of the white paper being available in the new year. And I think it's really interesting because what she outlined was it will be underpinned by belief that high standards and inclusion are two sides of the same coin. Of course, there's probably lots, I think it's fair to say, lots of worries, but also lots of opportunities and anticipation about what the reforms might propose. But of note, I think, and we've outlined this in point 2 of the report, are some of the principles that the Secretary of State has outlined that will underpin any proposed reforms. So, they're there, children receiving support as soon as possible, that early support, absolutely, you know, this is what we all strive to do across children's services and across the partnership. Local, that youngsters and are able to learn as close to home as possible, and that really does underpin sort of our philosophy here in Kirklees. We're currently, as you know, rebuilding 2 of our special schools. We've been working to establish more additional resource provisions. Very much our focus is on understanding what is needed and then striving to work to ensure that's in place. It talks about fairness, and in that respect, it's about making resource available. We absolutely have been working in this vein in terms of trying to get that support in early around some of our work with mainstream school clusters. And trying to identify need and make sure that's matched to the type of place they need, whether that's a mainstream place or it's a specialist place. And what's, I think, very helpful is that they talk about effectiveness, so evidence-based research, you know, just in terms of how as a partnership can we all work together to make sure that things that work, so what works for families, what works in schools, we can share that best practice and help everybody to do and be the best they can be. And something I think, you know, we came last time to Scrutiny with the outcome of our local area inspection, and it talks about education, healthcare, local authority, families, teachers, parents and carers and children themselves working together in partnership. And I think, you know, that is something we hold incredibly important as a partnership, and it was recognised by the inspection. We know there's still work to do, but absolutely that will be the vein in which we'll continue to work moving forwards. And we've just highlighted a couple of our strategies that, you know, don't just take my word for it. These are co-produced strategies, our SEND big plan, but also our Kirklees Futures, which is our learning strategy. So it does appear that we are going to be in a good place in terms of intent when the white paper comes out. Just in terms of we're anticipating it early in the new year. What we will absolutely begin to do now, in conjunction with our colleagues at the Department for Education, is we'll look to put on some opportunities to talk together as a partnership and with our families to just work through what will be in that white paper and how we might reflect on that to make sure it complements the things that are working well in Kirklees and also will underpin the things that we've outlined as areas where we still need to improve. So, yeah, that's where things currently stand, and I guess the proposal would be, panel, is that we come back when that paper is published, that you are very welcome to participate in some of those engagement sessions that we intend to hold, and then we can work through what's in there when we know a little bit more. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Vicky. I think, Joe, sorry. Sorry, with it. Thank you, Joe. Yeah, you've just touched on what I was going to ask, and that was around that next steps and timelines. So you talk about that engagement process, and I just wanted to know how really, as a panel, we can get involved with that, and who else will be involved within that process.
Thank you. We need everybody. We'd say it takes a village. Well, we need the whole partnership, and very much that partnership, we need young people's voice, we need families' voice. What we're currently considering putting in place, and we've some experience of when there was changes back in 2014, more than a decade ago, when things changed with the Children and Families Act. What we did at that time was try and bring as many people together as we could in sort of a big space, and just work through the contents of that white paper together and create some opportunities for discussion as a starter for 10. We've had the offer of support from our DFE advisor to work with us alongside that, which I think will be incredibly helpful. So we are looking currently for dates. There'll be some risks, won't there? We don't have an exact date for when this is published, but we're anticipating either just before or just after half term. And so we're just working on the details of that. All panel members will be welcome, as well as or interested parties, but just bear with us in that respect while we just think about the logistics. But we wanted to start as we mean to go on, which is working together, and we understand that, we don't know what it will say, and we want to be able to make sure we take a calm and measured approach, because I don't think that my experience with white papers are that it won't say, and it's going to be in place from next week. It will take a little bit of time, but we just don't know what's in there yet. I think when we go back to some of those principles, they seem to really fit with our approach here. So, like I say, that's what our intent to start as we mean to go on and work through some of that detail together.
No, thank you. That sounds good. Calm, collected and sort of measured approach. Any questions or comments? Councillor McKirker.
Thank you. That does sound really positive. I think all the panel will be really interested to be part of that. Actually, in terms of that engagement, it was only a question really about the letter that was included in the appendix, where Bridget Phillipson has referred to this current period of co-creation before they release the white paper. And I just wondered, obviously she's put about publicising these events through department channels. I just wondered if you had any sense of whether anyone in Kirklees has been able to engage with that process, and whether it's been genuinely shared and open to everyone.
Okay, so I think there's lots happening and due to happen at the moment. Just yesterday, and it is available, actually, I couldn't tell you how many people were on the webinar, but the Department for Education have put a series of webinars together, and each one is named after one of these principles. So yesterday's was very much in a reflection about local and focused on additionally resourced, we call them provisions. They were referred to yesterday as bases. And the format for that was an online, like a webinar where people could ask questions in the chat. They will be available, they're available after the event as well. They last about an hour, and yesterday's had the schools minister, Georgia Gould, and there was a head teacher from the South East. There was a parent forum representative and from another organisation supporting SEND, and it took the format of a dialogue, a conversation where you could hear and see some of the information, I suppose, that the DFE are looking to put in place, and we're trying to get some feedback, so there was some interactivity about people's views on additional resource bases and provisions. I think there was already been one prior, and there are some now that are scheduled for early in the new year, so January. So they're available. I think as well, the department and the Council for Disabled Children are looking to secure some in-person sessions as well. They're mainly scheduled, they're up and down the country, but mainly scheduled after Christmas. And I think very much the intent is to do some listening as well as just pushing things out there. I really do get a sense that parents and families are absolutely shaping the proposals, and I think that's as much as we know. We anticipate more information will be released over the coming weeks and post-Christmas. And then I suspect there'll be, once it's published, there'll be some expectations around next steps. But I guess we don't know yet because they haven't published it. But I think it's good to see, and it was good to participate in yesterday's session, just to hear about, give I think us some confidence, I think, in terms of our strategy about more additional resource provisions, because they're meeting helping to meet the needs of our youngsters. So, yeah.
Thank you. And I'm sure the answer will be yes, but are the dates of the webinars and the in-person, if there is an in-person session anywhere near here, will that go on the local offer so that parents can sort of see and easily access them?
Just in terms of what goes on the local offer, we can make that available. The department have been pushing out through, there's a National Parent Carer Forum as well. So I was pleased that our Parent Carer Forum had shared some of those things with us rather than the other way around. But absolutely, I think it's a great suggestion, and we'll do our utmost to make that available. They're bookable via Eventbrite. I think yesterday's was during the day. The other sessions are around about 6 o'clock. So I think they've taken some feedback about the timing with working parents, etc. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jo. Any further comments, questions? Councillor Bramwell?
Thank you. Yeah, given the delays, and apologies if you've already answered this because you've given a lot of information, but given the delays, what immediate changes can families realistically expect to see in the next 12 months?
Well, our philosophy, we will approach any things that are set out in any white paper. We'll consider those, make sure that they complement things that are already happening in Kirklees. It won't stop us at this moment in time. Like I say, I think there's many synergies. So, for example, we're all, it's exciting in terms of Joseph Norton being rebuilt. You watch this space. I think we're just about to share some more information. The steel frame is up. We'll still carry on creating those additional places, because the white paper probably will look here and now, but also moving forwards. We know we've got children and families here now who have needs now, and we have to make sure that we're supporting improvements for them now. Hopefully that will move us in the right direction for anything that comes out in the white paper. Big Plan 3, so we were inspected as a local area partnership. We've set out some really clear actions over the next 12 months, particularly around preparation for adulthood. Communication, we can always do more when it comes to communication. Improvements in the quality of education, health and care plans, because a good quality plan really helps the whole system to meet the needs of youngsters. And we know that there are still improvements to make anyway on the current system. I don't anticipate, like I said, that a white paper will be published one day and then it'll be more about how do we plan to implement whatever's proposed. So we'll carry on doing all the things that we've already set out in our big plan, particularly Big Plan 3, which complements Big Plan 2. And we'll continue to review sufficiency of learning places. We'll look at waiting lists as best as we can with our partners in the health. And there are some exciting opportunities with the Healthy Child programme. So, yeah, we'll continue in the vein that we have been. I think the other thing maybe to touch upon is Best Start hubs. Again, there's lots of information and guidance that the government are starting to share with us, but that gives us a gorgeous opportunity as well. There was a particular communication around support for families 0 to 5 where youngsters may have a special educational need or disability. And I think everything we've been doing, it's the right thing to do, so it's stepping us in the right direction. So, yeah, we'll keeping on because we are actively listening to young people and families, and we understand where things are a struggle. What I hope is, I suppose all our aspiration is that this will help us get there sooner, and we're well placed to deal with any changes that come forward. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Jo. So if there's no further questions or comments, we'll move on to agenda item number 8. So the panel will now consider a report and presentation on education, health and care plans, compliance, mediation tribunals and complaints and compliments. So again, is it over to yourself, Jo?
Thank you. So firstly, can I say thank you to Scrutiny panel. I think, we've really valued your support and challenge over the past few months with the focus that you've had on everything to do with our big plan. I think what we committed to do this year was to provide an update on where we were at across all parts of the process when it comes to education, health and care plans. How compliant are we with new assessments? Where there is a disagreement, if you like, about what we are doing in terms of fulfilling our statutory duties in relation to mediation, because there was some challenge earlier in the year. And also then to provide some data and information about those families that have chosen still remain unhappy and are able to exercise their rights through a tribunal process, and to give a flavour of where we're at in terms of complaints and compliments. So what we've tried to do in the report is to make reference to data that's available in the here and now, where we're at currently in this year, but also then so that we can give, I suppose, some context. I think I've shared with you before that all local authorities have to return what's called a person-centred census around special educational needs and disabilities, and it's called SEN2. And because all local authorities have to complete this, they make that return. We're gearing up now for ours that will report on performance over 2025, so it works on a calendar year. And we'll start to complete that early in the new year. The department then take all that information and they then release some statistical information, so it shows what things are like across the country. And that's helpful, isn't it, to see whether our situation in Kirklees fits with similar patterns in other parts of the country, or whether we're experiencing better or worse, or when it comes to compliance and performance. So we've tried to provide this information. There's a lot of data in here. We've tried to do it as simplistic as possible. I think what I would start by saying is, we know, as I've just said in the previous item, the system is incredibly complicated. It feels, you know, I absolutely recognise it feels incredibly challenging for many families. You know, we hear that, we listen to that, we put in place with our Parent Carer Forum some training that absolutely helps our partnership to understand what it's like a day in the life of a parent with one or more youngsters that may have additional needs. And, you know, we have to work to the best endeavours that we can with the resource that we have and with the system that we've got. So reform is coming, and, you know, we'll welcome that. We know that things have not been where we'd want them to be. And I think, as we've sort of said last year, we ended up where we had quite a number of EHC needs assessments that were outside the statutory timescale of 20 weeks. What we have done, though, is seen significant improvement, and Scrutiny have been able to see that month-on-month improvement over the last 12 months. So we've seen a similar number of requests for new EHC needs assessments, but what we have started to see is our compliance go from 0 about 18 months ago, and as it currently stands, and looking cumulatively, we're about 58%, which is not 100%, and that's where we strive to be, but it's significantly better. And if you compare that to the extract of SEN2, so where nationally the average was, it's significantly better than last year's average and the previous year's average, recognising that obviously some areas are performing much better and some much worse, but significantly better. We've seen that improvement and we've sustained that improvement as a partnership. Just in terms of then the number, I think sometimes we talk about percentages of compliance. Each plan, each assessment is a youngster. And I think if I could just draw your attention to, it's page 3 of the report, but 21 in your booklet, just the number of education, health and care plans that the local area maintain. At the end, so almost 12 months ago, we had 4,475 children and young people with an education, health and care plan. That was an increase from the previous year when it was 4,125. As it currently stands, and we're not yet, you know, end of December will be the cut-off point, but we've got now in excess of 5,030 in the local area. So you can see that's a significant rise, and all of those EHC Ps then require an annual review, etc. So just in terms of, you can see that growth in the system. So there's greater demand, and when you look at how this compares nationally, I don't think we're out of kilter nationally. I don't think we're highly above the national average or highly below. So we are in keeping with the national picture. One of the things that we have done in terms of, we have the EHCP team. We put an awful lot of work into making sure we got back to basics and building from some strong foundations, and absolutely wanting to operate in line with the SEND Code of Practice and the Children and Families Act. And we've put some information in this report just to explain about the types of panels that we now have in place and the terms of reference, and making sure that the right people around supporting good and strong decisions. and to make sure that we are ensuring people have their statutory rights met. That doesn't always mean to say that there is consensus and agreement, but actually we can have confidence in the processes that we're undertaking. What we've tried to do as well, just to make sure that, you know, lots of the processes around mediations and tribunals, there are specific sections in an EHCP that can be challenged. So what we've tried to do is make sure everybody's got a shared understanding about the different sections in an EHCP. The format can be agreed at the moment locally, and you can see an example of one of ours in the appendices, just so that we've got a shared understanding. So, as you can see then, in terms of compliance, as at October, we had 5,032 plans, a 6.63% increase, and you can see that we were 57.4% compliant. And there's lots to be proud of from where we'd started, and now it's really important we continue to maintain that. I think what we've also said, it's not just about being compliant, the quality of the plans are incredibly important. It's not just about processing things, it's making sure that they really are of good quality and set out clearly what the needs of the youngsters are, and then being very clear about how those needs should be met by each part of the partnership, whether that's in an education setting, whether a youngster needs some health or therapy support, and whether there is some care support needed as well. And we invested in an audit tool so that we can again see not just the whole plan in its entirety, but also each section is that of good quality. And if we think that the quality isn't where it should be, being able to work with practitioners to make improvements. And this is where we're getting some help and support from colleagues in NHS England, as well as our DFE advisor. So we're seeking out all the time ways in which we can improve practice. So I'll move on to sort of, we refer to this as resolutions, so where, you know, we do get complaints, and I think just in terms of, we wanted to make sure that we were dealing with those in the best way we can, and we just wanted to contextualise for you 5,000 plans, and some that are in train, but just in terms of, you know, this is the position, we've shown you September and October. At the moment, as at end of October, we had 35 live complaints. And that excludes tribunals, because wherever possible, we try and seek a resolution. But just again, to contextualise, in terms of live complaints, that is less than 1%. Each one's incredibly important. We absolutely understand where, you know, where things have not gone the way they should have, and we do strive to look into those and provide timely responses. It's not, again, just about hearing the complaints and resolving complaints. It is also about how do we then take the learning from where things have not gone well. If there is fault on the part of on behalf of the partnership or the council, how then can we again use that learning so that we improve practice? So there's active learning. I think as well it's really important to say that, you know, it might feel surprising, but we also do get compliments. Not everything's terrible, and there is some exceptional casework that is undertaken by the team. Things do go well for many, many families, and, you know, they're having their needs met across the education, care and health system. it might not have always been easy to get there, but again, we can start to see some of the improvement in practice. And we just wanted to make sure that, you know, because I think some scrutiny panel have had the opportunity to observe at some of the panels, and you will have seen that caseworkers come and present about youngsters. They understand the youngsters that they are talking about. These are children and not just numbers on a page. So there's just a couple of examples there, you know, just in terms of, you know, meaningful difference, hard work. I think people do really appreciate what a challenging system it is, and, you know, are keen to tell us when we get it right, which is great to hear. Mediations. So mediations probably weren't going for us as well in terms of our input into the mediation process. And we took some feedback and we did some analysis just in terms of how could we support the mediation process better. I would say wherever possible, we do want to try and resolve issues outside of a legal process wherever we can. But I think it is a parent's right to exercise a mediation and a tribunal route. It's not, you know, I don't think it is the most pleasant of experience for anybody in that process, but that's the system that we're all operating in. So again, we've set out some information there about expectations around mediation and some of the reasons whereby which people have requested mediation where they've been unhappy around the decisions. I think what we've wanted to be clear about, because there is good terms of reference, because we are working with that SEND code of practice, where we've ended up, for example, you can see that there's been some challenge there about decision not to assess for an EHCP. Sometimes those have been resolved at mediation. The reason being there wasn't evidence and information available at the time of making the original decision. So if additional information is available, then of course, you know, we will overturn those decisions. But you can see the mediations, and that's between the period of July to October. 43 were about not to assess. Sometimes we can assess the needs of the youngsters as a partnership, and then based on those assessments, there's a decision not to issue a plan because needs can be met at SEN support. And small number around the content, and then we have had mediation about ceasing a plan. So again, it has to be evidence-led. So then SEND tribunals, again, you can see the rationale whereby which a tribunal can be brought. You can see that this is incredibly pressured. I know because we've had lots of queries. At the moment, it's taking about 12 to 15 months for a tribunal to be, a date to be given, which is an incredibly long time where there is challenge, I suppose, in the system, which is obviously of great concern when there's a young person involved and I would say even when we're in a tribunal process, we don't stop working with a family. Wherever possible, if we can bring resolution, we will do, but once it's in that formal process, we have to follow I suppose the terms and conditions of operating within that system. So you can see there, just in terms of the nationally available data compared to Kirklees, and the numbers are not insignificant. But again, in relation to the total number of plans we maintain, you can see it's around about 2%. So just in terms of, we are seeing a rise in tribunals and mediations. That is also true of the national picture. So I think nationally it's a challenge. It's not just things that we are or aren't doing in Kirklees. this is a national, and sometimes it can be about the type of place that a parent prefers and where needs can be met. Sometimes it can be about content, and like I say, this is part of the challenge of the national system. But what we wanted to do in this report panel is to just be as open and transparent as we could be about where our performance is, about the information that's nationally available, and to give some assurance that we're not out of kilter, but also that we do recognise that each one of these is a child, and you know, there's family wrapped around that. So probably, I think that's the content of the report. I'll try my best to answer any questions that panel members may have.
Thank you, Jo, for that. That was a really comprehensive report in a really challenging field. I think I'm right to say that. We've got Councillor Smith online, who's patiently had his hand up for quite some time. So over to you, Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I only put it up to just mark the spot. I didn't expect anyone to bring me in until the presentation was finished, so thank you. Thanks for the report, Jo. It's quite detailed. So I think the first thing to say is that it's really complicated, and I don't fully understand everything that you guys do. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions if I can. Well, I hope I'm allowed to ask three, actually. Two of them are quite easy to answer. And I think really to say the obvious, which scrutiny has always been something that should be a critical friend as opposed to... So what I'm trying to say is if any of these questions come across as sort of trying to put you on the spot, they're not intended to be like that at all. They're intended to be asked so that I've got a better understanding, and also so that scrutiny can do what it's supposed to do and add a bit of value. So it's not intended to criticise at all. So firstly, I just go back to page 21. It's page 21 in my book anyway, potentially page 3 of this section, and it talks about, it's got the table in where it talks about the number of EHCP plans, etc. on towards the top of the page. So question 1 is, when it talks about the percentage of requests that get a plan, this is really for my understanding more than anything else. So if a plan is requested, does that automatically generate a plan? I suspect I know the answer to it, but if you could just clarify that. And second point about the same data is that we've got figures for Kirklees for 2 years, and we've got national figures where I'm not sure if I'm looking at this correctly. So would we be able to find the number of per capita figures, I suppose, what I'm asking for? So in terms of the population of Kirklees is 4,475. In terms of a percentage, similar, a lot higher or a lot lower than per capita figures for elsewhere. So those are two questions. I've got one quick third one, if I may, but could you just deal with those two first, please?
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Does a request automatically translate into a plan? No, is the answer. And sometimes that's where we can get a challenge, there can be a complaint, or that's where parents and carers can exercise their right to mediation. So what happens is when a request for a needs assessment comes in, so that's why we refer to it as a education, health and care needs assessment, a request will come in. At the moment, on average, in the last month, about 67% come from education settings, whether that's early years or school, and a smaller percentage then from parents, but we are seeing that increase. So a parent can request a needs assessment. What happens then is that is reviewed, the information is reviewed. If there isn't enough information, and actually the threshold is quite low, but if there isn't enough evidence, then it may well be the panel takes a decision not to undertake an assessment. The most, I suppose, more than less, do go through to a decision to assess, and then professionals like educational psychologists and therapy services and our colleagues in social care are asked for professional advice based on the presenting needs of the youngster. And based on that information, then it goes to a panel, the decision whether to issue a plan or not. That panel sits weekly so that we can be as timely as possible, and it will be that panel whether we issue a plan, some based on the assessment, if we feel that youngsters' needs can be met through a graduated approach, for example, then at that stage they might not have a plan issued. So a request does not automatically turn into an assessment or a plan, but absolutely each one is looked at in detail. And if a decision to either assess or issue is not taken forward, sometimes additional information comes forward and that request can be resubmitted and reconsidered. But we try and base it on evidence, because that's the right thing to do for the child and the family. I hope that answers that one. In terms of per capita figures, I don't have the answer to that. I think it's a great question. I'm happy to go away and find that information, just in terms of what does that look like. And I wonder whether it's probably worth doing as a percentage of the 0 to 25 population, just because I think what we're seeing, I think we've said again here, we're seeing a decline in the sort of younger youngsters in terms of pupils and youngsters in the early years. So if that's okay, I'll take that one away, Chair, and bring that one back. I think it's a great question. Thank you.
Thanks. And the first answer was absolutely fine. Thank you. Yeah, and I think it would be useful just for us to understand if we're issuing, a significantly different number in terms of, percentages, then you wonder why. So the last question, and this one is not. So I'm going to try and phrase it in a way that doesn't make you feel like you need to be defensive. I look at the percentage of EHCP plans issued within 20 weeks, and it's increased from 23 to 24 quite a lot. And by the time we get numbers for 25, it might have gone up even more, but it's still about half the national average. So I don't necessarily want to understand in detail why that is, because I can suspect I know a lot of the reasons for that. I think what it'd be nice to hear is, are we going to continue with an upward trajectory, and have we got enough of a plan to get closer to the national average without going into loads of operational detail? Are we going in the right direction? And this time next year or the year after, is it going to look a little bit closer to 45, 46%? That's the sort of question.
So it's really good news, Councillor Smith. I think what we've tried to set out in the report, we've given you, so national average was 49.1% in 2023. Last year, it dipped nationally to 45.9%. It's measured cumulatively, so we look month by month. We've had, one of our months was as high as 70% of the plans we issued were within 20 weeks, but our cumulative performance is already better than last year's national average. So as it currently stands, we're at 57 just under 58%. So we're already better than last year's national average. Of course, we don't know what this year's national average will be, and probably won't until the DfE publish the outcomes of the SEN2 return. You know, absolutely no defence. Our ambition is 100%. The challenges are, it's a complex system. So I think we're already there, which is great, but if even at just under 58%, that does mean 42% aren't. What we're also measuring, and I think it's the right question to challenge us upon, is if it's not 20 weeks, how many weeks is it? And one of the things, we had quite a number when we had the backlog that were 50 weeks and above, 30 weeks and above, and there are quite a small number above those numbers of weeks, and usually it's because there is a complexity or we're awaiting a report from a particular professional. Sometimes it can be for other reasons as well. But yeah, it's the right question to ask. So I think we're on that and we are sustaining that above national average. What we have said is we saw a spike in requests in June and July. So we'd had around 30, 40, 50. We had 120, 130 in June and July. Dealing with spikes in requests is not helpful to the whole partnership, because if it was just down to one team, it'd be easier. But it's how we work with the partnership, because we can't write a plan or assess for a plan without the professional advice that we get from others. So it is trying to understand some of those trends and how we might mitigate against those. So I think they're really good questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo, and I think that's a really positive response, actually. And I absolutely understand how complicated this is, and I do generally. I have a lot of confidence in the teams that do this work, and so that the stuff's going in the right direction. I think your point about if it's not 20 weeks, when is it? Is the other one that I was thinking about. So, you know, if out of that 43%, if it turns out to be 57 next year, if out of that 43% that don't make the 20 weeks, you know, most of them at 21 weeks, we're not bothered, are we? But, you know, if 90% of those others are at 50 weeks, then we might be. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you, Jo, for the answers, and thank you, Councillor Smith. And you're right in saying that Scrutiny is here to support through challenge, so we appreciate that feedback. In terms of what Councillor Smith raised around the EHCP plans and how we compare to national and whether it might be useful to do it per capita, that would be really useful if we can have access to that data without creating more work for yourselves. The other thing that I was going to add and ask, actually, and Councillor Smith sort of beat me to it, was that whilst I think it's useful to look and see how we compare to national, I always find it more useful to compare ourselves to other local authorities and neighbouring authorities, particularly with, if you take into consideration like demographics, the challenges locally with NHS and other factors. Sometimes that's more valuable rather than just looking at it in black and white versus national. So I don't want you to create any more work or to look at that, but I think it's just useful to point that out, that is something that we should concentrate on and not take them as final values. So have we got any further questions from the panel on that? Councillor Bramwell.
Yeah, I just want to recognise that there has been massive improvements, and I think that people need to recognise the amount of work that's gone into making them improvements. But just going back to the tribunals, and again, forgive me if you've already answered this, but it's just something that I did say I would ask. What's the council's strategy to reduce tribunal appeals for next year?
I think it's really difficult, isn't it? It is people's rights. That's the system that's are in place, and there will be times where there isn't consensus between, I suppose, the local area partnership and a family, and wherever possible, I think just improving our attendance at mediation is incredibly important. dealing in a timely way with complaints. There will be times, though, whereby which there isn't agreement. I think there are still some challenges that we're seeking to address around sufficiency of places. Parents do have that opportunity to, you know, exercise their right about a preference for a particular school. Sometimes that is something that we're not going to agree on, and it's not because for any other reason than we are following the code of practice. It's not because we are trying to be withhold things. We want to be able to meet youngsters' needs. That said, resources are not unlimited. I think you know that we are part of a safety valve agreement. We make decisions based on how best youngsters' needs can be met. We have to balance that with cost, but what we want, and that's why you know, there's been big investment in sort of extending our special schools, our ARPs. We want to be able to have those needs met wherever possible, close to home, locally, state funded, where there's, you know, but we recognise that isn't always the case and doesn't always meet what a parent wants for their youngster. Wherever possible, we'll try and seek resolution, but sometimes that's just not possible. And like I say, we recognise it's, you know, it's a legal process. It is very challenging for anybody, for any party that's involved, and it's very time consuming and, you know, bureaucratic. So wherever possible, we'll try and find resolutions. We continue to work until that tribunal date happens. But it's, I think in a way as well, we can't withhold parents' rights to the, and maybe because we're improving practice, we are allowing people to take their rights. It'd be easy, wouldn't it, if we could just agree to everything, but I'd want to give some assurance that everything is done with the best of intention around a youngster. We just might not always come to a consensus about that. It's a complicated system, and I'd hope, you know, I'd love to see a situation where nobody had to go to tribunal. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Jo, and thank you, Councillor Bramwell, for the question. I understand you have to leave at 11:30, so if we can note that Councillor Bramwell is leaving now. So have we got any further questions? Councillor McKirker.
Thank you. I wanted to start as well by saying thank you for this report. It's a really clear summary of your approach, of some of the data, I really appreciated that you had included so much of the sort of standard process for all of our understandings. I think that's really, really useful, and potentially something that could be maybe put into a resource for new members of the panel, something that they can have sort of front and centre, the data on sort of how an EHCP is put together and those kind of things, because I found it really useful. I also wanted to second the change that I've seen in the time that I've sat on panel, and obviously you know I've raised things with you, and what I am hearing as well from parents has changed dramatically. So some of the issues around communication and responsiveness, I think the changes that are now have been put in place within the team are obviously working, because I'm just not getting those sort of messages coming through. I've also seen in practice how hard the team are working, so I wanted to just sort of echo that, and it is making a difference to, I think, both parents and young people's experiences. So one question, obviously you talked about that sort of partnership working, that it is not only down to the EHC team to sort of figure out these plans, and I just wondered, these changes and improvements that the council have put in place, are other partners coming with you, you know, so that overall we can hopefully, where there are hold-ups with accessing sort of maybe within health and things like that, are we seeing improvements on that side as well? And then I did have some questions around the sort of mediation and tribunal, so do you want me to run through those as well, or do that separately?
Thank you, Councillor McKirker. And can I just sort of say, you know, it is really appreciated you know, I think that challenge and support, it's really important. We're still not where we want to be, but I do think we've got some plans in place around, you know, some of the system. It's been challenging, but and we're not there yet, but just in terms of it's the quality of the casework, I think that's really important. One of the things that I think we've put it in the report is about being able to retain, so recruit and retain great staff once we've got them. There's been a really strong induction programme put in place. We've recently recruited some amazing people who come as experienced themselves with additional needs, have been in schools. So the team goes from strength to strength, and just being able to have the ethos that they've got, which is about wanting to make a difference, means a lot. In terms of the partnership, I think you can see it in our big plan. So we sort of, you know, enough of the right stuff. So how many school places or specialist places do we need? But that quality and compliance has been a real focus, and we've had some real dedicated, I suppose, forums so that everybody's on the same page. So people having a really clear and shared understanding that if advice doesn't come in time, that puts at jeopardy being able to do things in a timely way. And so, you know, I have to give credit to all our partners who have strived and worked with us. We'd never have got that improvement in practice. Our challenge now is to sustain some of that, and also to widen that for annual review processes. There are challenges in the system with capacity. That's what I mean about unlimited. There isn't unlimited resources. So, for example, educational psychology assessment is always required to issue an EHCP. We are having to bolster our capacity with locum EPs, just to make sure we are keeping the quality and compliance. But we are doing that in a measured way. We're making sure the quality is there alongside. It's not just about pushing things through a system. And I welcomed what was said. You know, if it's 21 or 22 weeks, but the quality is good, that's better than 20 weeks and it's not as good as it can be, because then we're not doing the right thing by the youngster. I think it's going to be tricky. There's no two ways about it, just in terms of capacity of things like our health partners. That said, they are with us on the journey, so it does really feel like, and again, I think it was reflected back to us that this is a local area partnership, not just the local authority, and that I'm really glad that that's there, and getting to be better understood, because sometimes, yeah, the EHCP team can be the focal point, and not often it's the partnership, but we're getting better at explaining that. I think it's interesting about what you say about making some of this information available. Lots is available on the local offer, but maybe that is something we can do to improve panel members' understanding. Sometimes it's hard, isn't it, to understand, Section F. What's Section F? So that's why we try to do that back to basics, because then we can have a better shared understanding. So thank you. I think you've helped us do that.
I wasn't necessarily meaning for it to be more work for your team. I'm wondering whether we could just take out the sort of factual parts of that report and make them into just a resource that's available for panel members. That was all. So I wasn't adding to your workload. So then, thank you. I had some questions around mediation. So I know there was previously an issue with mediation actually not being offered to all families, as I have heard it reported. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I know that there was a very deliberate sort of policy move to ensure that mediation is offered to everybody, and that's been in place, I think, for at least 12 months. which is great. I think my feedback from the mediation process has been really positive, and that's from both parents and also mediators talking about working with Kirklees officers. So I wanted your team to know that. But also I think it shows the value of mediation, and I think that from both sides actually everyone would rather mediation work than end up at a tribunal. So my question is around, I'm still hearing from some families who entered the tribunal process without having been offered mediation, who wished that they could have had that. Whether we are able to, you said at one point that obviously if they've chosen to go down the route of tribunal, that takes them past the step of mediation, active mediation, but is there still a parallel process where they can still be having conversations and potentially resolving issues before the actual tribunal itself? Is that still open to them? And is it clear how they can continue that conversation? Because again, I know that parents would want to. Did that make sense? Sorry.
Okay, so just for we've always offered mediation because you can't progress to tribunal. The EHCP team may not. When we were really challenged with staffing, we weren't always. So it was we weren't attending mediation and participating in it. We have to do that, use it, I think it says here we use global mediation. So you're absolutely right, that's not where we wanted to be, but things were really, really tricky a couple of years ago, so we had to do what we did. That has significantly changed, and I think it's really interesting. I was at the Parent Carer Forum's annual general meeting a few weeks ago, and I actually had the opportunity to talk to a couple of parents who said exactly the same thing. One mum, I think actually a tribunal date was pretty imminent, but she talked about having a really positive experience in mediation with her other child, and exactly that, she'd wished that had been available. What we did off the, as a result of that conversation, we asked for, we've undertaken a case file review. The timing was out in that respect, but very much that's what I mean about how do we learn and improve practice. So I do think, we have improved. We want to sit. That's why we've called it a resolutions. We want to find resolution wherever possible, and so often there's compromise to be had. In terms of tribunal, there are opportunities. You continue to work. Often that has to be done in writing, but there are opportunities to find resolutions. So the matters that the tribunal will hear may reduce. So we end up with a working document, etc. Sometimes, though, that's, and I think what's really interesting and something that I guess for everybody to reflect on, if you are waiting 12 months for a tribunal, sometimes where you started when you submitted for a tribunal, the world's significantly shifted, particularly if your child or youngster is in a transition phase. So that's something to reflect on. We will always try and look to resolve, but sometimes when you're in that process, you're in that process. I can give just an example, just recently where tribunal is due for January, but we have sought to resolve matters outside the tribunal, and at least then what ends up in that process will be minimal rather than... So each case is... I think it's really difficult to generalise because each situation is unique to the circumstances, but there's no lack of intent to want to resolve. Just sometimes that's just can't happen. Okay.
No, that's really positive though to know that there's still an avenue for families, particularly because of that delay with the tribunals. Like you say, if you're waiting 12 to 15 months, and feeling as though you can't even have the conversation. So that's obviously not the case, which is really good. I mean, in terms of, there was a huge amount of data in the report, so I may have just missed it. A couple of things that I thought it might be useful for us to know as a panel was what proportion of the cases that do get as far as tribunal are overturned by the tribunal. There is some data in there around a quarter period, but it reads as though the data don't match each other, so it's hard to work out what that proportion would be. And also just in terms of cost, you know, the cost of the tribunals to the LA is just something, I appreciate that it's not up to us to make that choice whether somebody goes to tribunal, but I think it's worth something the panel might be worth us being aware of at least. And then I had a question around the approach within tribunals, so, but that might be relating to the cost. Previously, my understanding, and again this may be wrong because I haven't been able to triangulate it, that we were sending barristers to tribunal, but that's not routinely the case now. And I suppose my question was more actually, if we've got officers attending tribunals, are you happy that there's sufficiency within the team that while somebody has their time taken up actually sitting in the tribunals, that there's obviously still all their other workload, and are you happy that the team has that capacity covered?
Okay. We can get the data that I think you're right, could be a bit clearer about what were the outcomes of tribunals, how many were upheld. Sometimes it's not black or white, sometimes it's partial. But we'll seek to do that. And I think what we're trying to do is provide information like what we've pulled together for this report, and then, you know, whatever we can publish in terms of transparency we'd like to put out there. I think it's really hard, isn't it? It's sort of, is it the performance of whether we did or didn't do the right thing? I just think each situation is so unique. It's really difficult, but it's fine to just publish for transparency. So let's look into that and see what we can provide. I think it's not the first time we've been asked about the costs, and I think it's really, really difficult to quantify, and I could spend, I'd say to you, it depends. So it depends on what do you want us to include in that cost. It depends how complex the case is. It depends on whether we need the, you know, legal services, whether we field another professional preparing, you know, do you mean the hearing itself? So I'm not trying to be evasive, but I think it's really, really difficult to quantify. Obviously, there's a cost to the public purse nationally, and I think looking at the national data is really interesting. Just there is cost in the time, money, energy and effort, you know, for the public purse, but that is the system currently that gives parents their rights. So it's a hard one, isn't it, about cost? It's not insignificant, and you know, we could pull something together, but each one is so unique that it's hard to say. It would be hard to say. I could probably do a here's one of our more complex cases. Sometimes there can be more than one hearing as well. So it's really hard just to say that that's the average cost. We'll go away and reflect on it, but like I say, it's hard. Barristers, lawyers, experienced members of the EHCP team, we will... It will depend. Sometimes things get incredibly complicated, and we just want to make sure we have got the most appropriate person at a hearing that can help provide a fair appraisal of, I suppose, in that situation in defence of the local area. And, you know, we will use a range of professionals, and it will depend on a number of factors. In terms of, we have created, because we wanted to make sure we were seeking resolutions, hence why we've got a small team when it comes to tribunals, mediations, complaints, because we want to make sure that they do have the capacity. Obviously, the less we have, you know, we're able to deploy those colleagues elsewhere to seek resolutions, but it is incredibly challenging, yeah, like I say, for all parties, including being in that, you know, preparing all the paperwork and making sure that we're compliant and it's fair, etc. So I think because now we have got more experience and have a more stable team, we are able to understand what the needs are. Sometimes, though, we might be having to bolster that with more experienced colleagues and just because of volume. So we have to be flexible, a bit like the numbers of requests. So, but ideally, you get a skilled team, but sometimes we will and need to bolster that with support from legal colleagues.
No, that's really helpful. I think the sort of change in approach actually sounds like it's a reflection of the changes you've implemented in the team, and it means that now it's more likely that the most appropriate person already sits within your team, whereas previously potentially you didn't have that person to call on, and so you would have had to have recourse to legal services and what have you. So I think that really helps me to understand the choice of who's actually representing the LA in the room, and that's really useful. And I do think the way that you've created that sort of team with a focus is one of the biggest things that's made a difference to, I think, people's experiences. So I think that's a really positive move. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor McKirker, and thank you, Joe, for answering those questions. I'm sure we could debate this for so long, but in the interest of time, if we could move on to agenda item number 9, which is the performance data. So the panel will consider a verbal update on the performance highlights from the latest Children's Services data report covering the period ending 31st of October 2025. So I'll hand over to Vicky Metheringham, which is Service Director.
Thank you. Yeah, Vicky Metheringham, Service Director, Family Support and Child Protection. So just with regard to the question around timescales for child protection review conferences and the decline in performance from by 5% from August to October. October's performance showing 92% of our review child protection conferences took place in time. Just to provide a little bit of clarity, so in July 2025, we had a total of 75 review child protection conferences, which is an exceptionally busy month for the unit. The reason for that, we made deliberate attempts to bring our conferences forward during July so that partner agencies were able to attend those meetings. Child protection reviews and initial child protection conferences can only go ahead if the quora, and we've got representation from enough agencies to represent an independent view and to make appropriate decisions. So in order to support quoracy, we brought forward a number of children's conferences earlier so that partners could attend those meetings and we could ensure that decision making was compliant. By comparison, we only had 18 review conferences during August 2025. When we've reviewed the child protection review conferences that took place in October, we could see that 54 conferences took place and just 4 of those were out of time scales, which led to that decline of performance to 92%. However, we're confident that that was the right decision. We take the view that it's the right thing to do to delay child protection conferences if there's a suitable reason for that. So the reason that those 4 conferences took place outside of timescale, 2, we needed to make sure we had enough partners to attend that meeting and to agree a suitable decision. For one family, there wasn't an interpreter available and we weren't prepared to go ahead with that meeting without the family being able to understand what was being discussed. And for one child, the parents were unable to attend the conference on the date that it had been arranged for. And again, we took the decision that we'd wanted parents to be involved in that meeting, because after all, it's their child that's being discussed. And parents need to be involved in decision making because they know their families better than anybody. We do make attempts to maximise timeliness, so usually a child protection conference that's due for a review is booked in at the either the initial conference or the repeat child protection conference, so that we can maximise notice for attendees and reduce the risk of those reviews going out of timescales. But as I've just explained, there are rare occasions where we don't achieve timeliness. I just wanted to give a quick overview in terms of the data surrounding our care leavers. So just to let people know that we've got 56% of our care leavers are engaged in education, training and employment, which is actually above our stat neighbours and the national average. If you take away the numbers of care leavers that aren't able to be engaged in education, training and employment due to illness, or whether they're a parent of a child, that brings our performance up to 63%. It's still much lower than we'd want it to be. It's a national difficulty around engaging care leavers in suitable education, employment and training opportunities, but we are really ambitious for our young people in Kirklees, and there are a number of our young people that are in university courses, undertaking degrees, and we are doing what we can to maximise opportunities for care leavers through apprenticeships as well within the council. And one of the priorities of our parenting board strategy is around the encouragement of care leavers to be engaged in opportunities. Just in terms of how well we support care leavers by keeping in touch with them, we are in touch with quite a high number of care leavers, 96.8% of our care leavers. And actually we're involved with about 90 care leavers between the age of 21 and 25. We're proactively trying to keep in touch with our care leavers, and we use two drop-ins, number 11 and number 12, and they're frequently a number of care leavers in there seeking support from their PAs. In terms of children who are assessed at being at risk of exploitation, and as to whether their assessments are up to date, at the minute we're working with 142 children that are at risk of exploitation, which is lower than recent months, and this relates to sexual and criminal exploitation. Previous month we reported 159 children. We have seen a reduction in the timeliness of some of those assessments for those young people. Currently we've got 8 overdue assessments. Just wanted to emphasise that all children that have been assessed at being at risk of exploitation do have an allocated worker. They do see those young people regularly and frequently, and we have good oversight of all of those children. The overdue assessments suggest that those young people already have an assessment that's been started, and we have a range of systems in place to make sure that we've got multi-agency overview of those children's circumstances. So we have weekly performance meetings with service managers and heads of service. The assessment's just one element that's used to monitor and respond to change. Any new information that comes in is shared in our daily risk, exploitation and missing meetings, so that we can make any immediate response if circumstances change regarding those young people. And all children that are assessed as being at high risk are discussed in the monthly exploitation screening panel, irrespective of whether there's an assessment that's overdue. So the average length of the assessments that are overdue is 25 days, with the oldest one being overdue by 2 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky, for that report. Really informative. I know as a panel we've had the opportunity to visit some of the care leavers at Hub 11 and 12. Found it really interesting, and I've had the opportunity to meet some of the care leavers that are part of the apprenticeship programme with the council, and that was really fantastic to meet them and hear, you know, the positive outcomes that they were achieving. So yeah, well done on that. Any comments from the panel or questions? Anybody online? No? So no questions from the panel. So I just want to say thank you for that report, really informative.
Thank you.
Yeah. So then if we can move back on to Jo for the question.
Thank you, thanks. I don't have an awful lot given the report that's just been, just to re-emphasise, obviously something that I've been measuring really closely is EHCP compliance. As at October, that stands at 57.4, and last year's national average at the SEN2 extract was 45.9. So what I will say, we had spikes for requests to assess in June and July this year. Same thing happened last year, and it does coincide with the summer holidays for schools. So, you know, let's get all those requests in. So we are looking at how we can maybe do things a little bit differently, but it's likely to impact on our timeliness compliance into the next calendar year. If you cast forward 20 weeks from July, you're getting into January. So we're just having to really focus on that carefully, because it just puts pressure on all advice givers. Panel may have noted we've had a few issues with pulling through data this time when it comes to some of the information on exclusions, elective home education, part-time timetables, a few glitches in the system. But I would want to give some assurance that we do monitor these things incredibly closely. For example, we look at exclusions on a fortnightly basis. Comes to our SLT, we're looking at how we can support and put in some support around youngsters who are excluded. What I would say, as at the end of November, so that run up to in the autumn term, we've had a total of 46 notifications of permanent exclusions. At that time, at the time of the data extract, 5 of those were withdrawn. So the total number of excluded youngsters currently stands at 41. We are seeing this as an increase compared to the same period last year. So we are undertaking some further analysis to see what can be done, and certainly the impact on youngsters for day 6 provision, because that's a local authority statutory duty to wrap support around those youngsters so they have their educational needs met from the 6th day of exclusion. I think there's some work that we're going to undertake as well alongside other local authorities with head teachers across Yorkshire and Humber. This is some research-led practice that's been supported through sector-led improvement and the University of Oxford that can look at a range of solution-focused strategies for inclusion in schools. So be interested to see how that plays out with our secondary schools over the coming months. Just in terms of then, I think panel were interested in understanding the current position on youngsters who are electively home educated, and just in terms of whether the numbers in Kirklees were sort of similar to neighbouring authorities. I can give some feedback again that as what we have to measure and what we choose to measure, but what we have to measure around children who are electively home educated, we report on whether numbers of youngsters, whether they've been educated at home at any point in an academic year. If we look at the total number for the academic year 24-25, at at some point during the year, there were 1,320 youngsters who had been electively home educated. As it currently stands, and of course we're not quite at the end of this academic year, there are and have been 1,065 youngsters. So we are seeing an increase. We definitely saw more on that register in terms of September. That tends to follow a pattern because of the start to the new academic year, and slightly higher than this time last year. Just in terms of as at yesterday's date, currently registered as electively home educated, there were 920, and that's because many of those youngsters have either returned to education, they might have moved out of the local area, and in some instances there's some families that we are working with in our Children Missing Education team to try and secure them school places. So something we actively monitor and engage appropriately in line with our statutory duties with our families. Just then, I think, I know there was some interest from the panel around part-time timetables. Just to give some clarity, part-time timetables are also called reduced timetables. Schools do understand how these ought to be used, and they should be used in exceptional circumstances and can be used often, for example, if there's been a medical need of a youngster, or reintegrating youngsters back into school after a period of absence, just because that helps them to have that good integration back into full-time school. And in some instances, whilst they are short term, actually they can absolutely help to have a successful reintegration. What's been really interesting, since September 2024, schools do have to record whether they're utilising a part-time or reduced timetable, which is really helpful because we can start to capture nationally some of those statistics. It's really important when we're reviewing absence and attendance. There isn't yet a national data set, but so it's really difficult for us to compare what's happening here locally with nationally. But just in terms of if we look at the number of notifications in October, we received 171. And if we compare that to October in 2024, we had 175. So we're not seeing a huge increase, but we do check out with schools that these are being utilised appropriately. I think that's probably the information that I've got for you there, panel members. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jo. I think quick question from Councillor McKirker.
Thank you for a comprehensive answer to the questions I sent. It was only a little follow-up to the EHE. You mentioned that some of the young people who are listed as EHE then move out of area, and I just wondered if that's tracked. So obviously in terms of children missing from education, they don't drop through the cracks when they move out of area.
Thank you, Councillor McKirker. Absolutely, we work across, we have a very forensic children missing education team that work with, they carry out inquiries to make sure sometimes youngsters move to another country, but to another local authority, and are quite forensic in making sure that those youngsters are followed up and handed across appropriately. I think in the Wellbeing and Schools Bill, I think it's keen that there's almost a national approach to this, so that we absolutely make sure that no child's out of sight. So give you some assurance, absolutely. And reciprocal arrangements are in place for any of our youngsters that may have been educated in another LA. We also get those authorities following up on our behalf as well. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Jo. Just to note that Councillor Smith, who was online, has had to leave the meeting. So we'll move on to agenda item number 10, which is pre-decision scrutiny. I know we've got Councillor Ryler in the room. I don't know if there's anything on the horizon that scrutiny panel need to be aware of.
I think just the school's white paper is going to be, well, when that is released, and there'll be a lot of feedback from that. So I think that will be one of the biggest areas that we'll be looking at in the new year.
Yeah, thank you. And item 11 on the agenda is feedback from panel members on issues considered by Kirklees Parenting Board. So then, again, we've got Councillor Kendrick online. I don't know if you want to give us an update on the last meeting or any feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. The last meeting was not a typical parenting board meeting, and I think was really valuable. In terms of it was a takeover meeting by our young people, our care leavers and young people looked after. There were a lot of young people there. We altered the timing of the meeting so that young people who were working at college, at school, could attend. They started us off with an icebreaker, always fills me with dread, but it was very good, where we had to talk to someone who we didn't know. And I talked to a young person to find out something different about that people wouldn't generally know about each other. And I think that caused a lot of laughter, but it did the business in terms of breaking the ice. Young people gave us several presentations about things they were involved in, trainings that they were developing for the benefit of members of council and wider. And we ended up working in groups, round tables, about what we could do, what we could offer, addressing challenges for change that they made and asking us for pledges. And I think it was a very vibrant and really useful meeting. And the young people who were, some of whom were very nervous, but they did brilliantly at the meeting. That's basically it. I haven't yet got the notes and reminders of what on earth it was I promised or said I'd do, but I await with interest.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. Yeah, sadly I wasn't able to attend that event, but I have previously attended a takeover event, and they're always really vibrant and really good to see. Councillor Ryler, did you have your hand?
Yes, I was just going to second that. I think it was a really good occasion, and it was timetabled so that it was early evening, so that the care leavers and the young people in care were able to attend it. And I think it was great to get to hear their voice and their take on what was happening in Kirklees, their opinions, their ideas. It was very refreshing and very enlightening.
Thank you, Councillor Ryler. Councillor McKirkland.
I just had a question, because I don't attend these meetings, but they always sound great. I know you've mentioned the takeovers before, and it sounds like a brilliant idea. But I was just browsing to see if I could have a look at the minutes, which I know you've said for that actual meeting are not available yet. But on the website, I can only see up to July 24 for the parenting board, and I didn't know if there's a reason for that and why there's no more recent minutes available.
Councillor Kendrick, did you want to answer that?
I don't know is the answer, and I don't know why nothing further is on there. I think we've had certainly one in between then.
Can I just advise that the meetings are no longer held in the public session, so that obviously the minutes are now not published in the public domain.
Would it be okay, maybe it might be worth popping a note on just to make that clear so people don't just think like I did, oh, it's not been updated.
Yeah,
Would I ask, were you saying there was some in July this year?
No, last year. Like July last year is the last time. So.
Right.
Joe, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I think if you looked at those, it was at that point there was an alternative put forward, so it changed, didn't it? The constitution changed, and so that actually it could get on and do much more in the nicest possible way, rather than just being a series of reports. So a proposal was put forward, which was agreed then, and yeah, so it's now, it's not the corporate parenting board, it's Kirklees parents, and you know, I think it's been really helpful, hasn't it? I've seen both sides, so there is a reason, and maybe on the website it just needs a little note there, but it wasn't just decided, it was agreed through the proper channels, so thanks.
I hope that clarifies it. Thank you. And final item on the agenda is the work programme. So I'm sure you've all got a copy of the work programme agenda plan, and you've had an opportunity to look at it. Just to make you aware, there's a number of visits that we've just discussed. I think 3 visits lined up in the new year, which we're just in the process for arranging dates and times for. So we'll update that as and when. Any comments on the agenda plan from anyone? No? No comments. So with that, I'll draw the meeting to a close. Thank you all for your attendance and your participation, and wish you well. Thank you.